Hello and welcome to Lovechurch Online. This is Weekday Word. My name is Ed Clark, and this week I'm going to be leading us through a series based on 2 Timothy. Today we're going to look at 2 Timothy chapter 1 verses 6 to 7. And here it is in the NIV version. For this reason I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. Talking about this passage brings out the child pyromaniac within me. There's nothing more exciting than playing with fire. And as a young child, I had great experiences of building fires and taking matches to things and seeing how it would burn. And I'm going to lead us through today a reflection on this passage, but I also hope to give you a little bit of a physics lesson and maybe a little bit of a Cubs Scout lesson as well. And here we go. We know that fire takes 3 things to work. Fire takes heat, oxygen, and fuel. Now in science we call this like a fire triad. These are the 3 elements that make a fire work. But in my experience, I found two quite easy ways of making a fire. Now the first is this: you take a pile of logs and you add what I'll call an accelerator. You add petrol. And when you take your match and you light it and you get a whoosh as the fire erupts. This is a really easy way of making a fire if you're having people come over. It looks quite professional if you can just go whoosh and create a fire. But this process has some faults as well. You see, when you approach fire as something that's quite quick and easy and you just get your whoosh, you quite quickly burn through the wood, and if you neglect to look after the fire, what you're left with is disappointing embers. But there is another way of making a fire as well. And this is the one I used to do as a kid, where you take kindling and you'd make a pyramid and you'd place newspaper and cotton wool in the middle. And what you'd do is you'd build up a fire, you'd stoke the fire, you'd fan it into flame. And if you gave the fire the proper care and attention across the evening, you could keep this fire going. As a Christian, how do you approach your faith? Do you pour the petrol on and get a sudden blaze, a sudden whoosh of faith? Or are you fanning your faith into flame? Are you stoking the fire? And just like our physics triangle, the triad I talked about earlier, where you take heat, oxygen, and fuel, to become a Christian with a fully alive faith, you need 3 things. You need power, love, and self-discipline. This is our triad for a fiery faith. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. Paul encourages Timothy to fan into flame the gift of God given to him. Let's take it back a step. See, when fire takes place, fire usually takes a spark, it takes a match, it takes something to start it off. Causality tells us that a small spark can create a raging fire. A small spark can be a catalyst for a large blaze. The message of this passage starts with a spark. We read that it is through the laying on of my hands that the gift of God is within Timothy. This was the spark for Timothy. It's a spark that began something within him, the spark that was shared with him. This is a significant starting point. We don't do this whole faith thing alone. We do this faith thing with others in our community. In Paul's understanding of church, it is impossible to function as a solo individual. Living a life of faith requires others gathering around you and sparking faith within you. Paul encourages the stoking of our faith, to fan into flame the gift of God. This fire isn't meant to stay small. It's not a timid thing. It doesn't withhold itself. We read that the Spirit that God gave us does not make us timid. We're not to approach this with timidity. Another beautiful truth that we get from this passage is that the presence of God dwells with us. Well, that there is very good news. We can't live a life of faith without community with others around us. But we also can't live a life of faith without community with God. We've got this horizontal aspect to it and this vertical aspect to community. Living a life of faith requires the triad of power, love, and self-discipline. Just like a real fire, all these three things are needed in equal measure. How do you put out a fire? Well, you can take away the heat, or you can take away the fuel, or perhaps you take away the oxygen. That's how you extinguish the fire. And fire requires each element of this triad. Well, so too does faith. An alive faith needs power, love, and self-discipline in equal measure. These are the three key components to faith, according to Paul. One without the other does not sustain faith. Having two and having less of one does not lead to long-lasting faith. There is a clear call in 2 Timothy to foster our faith, to build it and sustain it. There is an invitation today to faith. Let's spark and let's fan into flame the gift of God that has been given to us. Amen.